Tucker Carlson went on Fox and Friends to talk about his new book. Let's see what he had to say about it, and then I'll break it down for you and explain why he's better at selling his snake oil compared to the other snake oil salesman on Fox News.
Who are the ship of fools? Your brand new book. You're talking about the elites, and there's a new category of elites.
Well, I just was obsessed with the question, why did the president get elected? Why did the country elect Donald Trump? I mean, we covered the campaign, watched it carefully, and the explanations I was hearing were insane. Oh, Putin did it. Voters are racist. They voted for... It's like so dumb. And so I spent a year thinking about it, and the answer is because the people in charge, by the way, in both parties to some extent, made a series of really bad decisions, never admitted it, and critically never learned a single thing from it, and instead blamed voters for the problems. And in the end, voters said, you know what? We're going to punish you. You're not listening to us, and we're going to do something so radical that you're going to have to pay attention. We're going to elect someone you didn't expect, Donald Trump. And by the way, what happened? The people in charge completely ignored the lesson, refused to learn anything, and instead continued to attack the voters even more.
Who in particular is in the ship?
Well, I mean, look, I would say the people who made the critical decisions on our foreign policy and our economic policy, and by the way, our social policy over the past 30 years, you know exactly who they are. They include many leaders of the Republican Party, almost the entire Democratic Party, and by the way, a lot of our business leaders who, you know, profited. Look, the problem is the middle class in the country became a minority in 2015. Nobody even noticed. It wasn't a news story, and yet it was the critical shift of my lifetime. You can't have a democracy in a country that doesn't have a middle class majority, and nobody cared.
And as he's redoing these trade agreements, as he's deciding not to get involved in conflicts, it's beginning to build up the middle class. What you saw yesterday in the morning that rocketed up everyone's 401ks was redoing NAFTA because manufacturing left. Workers no longer had a place to go. Now, yeah, we might pay a little bit more for automobiles, but now we're going to have a reason to build things again.
All that matters is that the average person in the country feels like he's vested in the system.
Or she.
Or she, I'm just using the grammatically correct pronunciation. But yeah, I mean, it could be, of course, he is a stand-in. But the point is, he or she feels like my life is getting better, my effort is paying off, and my kids have a shot at a better life than I do. The average 22-year-old knows he or she is not going to make what his or her parents made. Like, that's a disaster. You have to fix that.
But, Coach, you say the liberal party, the Democratic Party has changed. You're not criticizing Democrats. You're saying what you see now on the left really concerns you because it's different than anything you've seen before.
Well, it's terrifying. I grew up around liberals in California and Washington, D.C., and they believed in free speech and due process and colorblindness. You're seeing these exact same people crush speech, deny due process, and tell us that the most important thing about people is their DNA and their skin color. It's a mirror image of the way they were. It's terrifying and Orwellian, and it's a threat to all of us, liberal and conservative. And we should honestly speak up every time they challenge those basic American values.
Tucker,
First thing he does that helps him, he blames both parties, and he blames the establishment. On Fox News, you don't get that elsewhere. On Fox News, most of the hosts, most of the time, have the same narrative over and over. Republicans are right, Democrats are wrong. Even to the point of, when it comes to Republicans, even if they contradict, even if one Republican contradicts another Republican, and they have differing views on the same topic, somehow Fox will spin it to be like, they're both Republicans, they're both right. Which makes no sense, but they don't care. That doesn't have to make sense. They're just selling you partisan garbage. So what Tucker does, which immediately puts him in a different category of propagandist, and a more successful one at that, is he blames both parties, blames the establishment. Okay. Very intelligent move. Next thing he does is defends the voters. You don't get that on the rest of Fox News. They are more elitist on the rest of Fox News. Then he blames our foreign policy, our economic policy, and our business leaders. When was the last time you heard a host on Fox News blame business leaders? Answer, never. In fact, Stuart Varney is probably watching this segment having a heart attack because his beloved business leaders he views as demigods who can never be wrong in any circumstance ever. So for Tucker to go after our foreign policy, which, by the way, includes, and I know because he debated John Bolton on the Iraq War, although back in the day, Tucker was for the Iraq War. So again, it shows you still a snake oil salesman, but rebranded in an effective way. He blames our foreign policy, blames our economic policy, blames our business leaders. They'd never blame business leaders. The economic policy, well, we've had deregulation nonstop. Are you blaming that? More on that later. And then to blame the foreign policy, that, again, both parties, our foreign policy, that's him saying in so many words, hey, the interventionism is fucked up. Again, even though it masks his past of being for the intervention. But that, again, smart move, because people who don't know his past are going to watch that and go, man, this guy might be telling the truth. And then finally, he frames everything in a populist way. And that's what makes him so much different from the other Fox hosts. But what he does when it comes to the left is where the real trick comes into play. So there's a point that's embedded in what he's saying, and it's, I'm populist. By extension, the right is populist because he's on the right, and the left is, and the framing is authoritarian and elitist. That's the framing. And what he does is he defines the social justice warrior fringe, the people who spend their time trying to prevent Ben Shapiro from giving a speech at a college and making safe spaces on college campuses. He defines that group of people from the left, which is, by the way, what percentage of the left? It is a tiny minority, a tiny fringe of the left that is the uber obsessed with, social issues and are trying to deplatform speakers. He frames that as the left. So it's a generalization. You take the fringe and you define that as the majority of the left, and then that allows you to get away with the framing of the right is populist, the left is authoritarian and elitist, and doesn't that say it all right there? So that's the trick he's using. And it's so much more sophisticated than the other Fox hosts because you take something with a grain of truth in it, that, okay, there is this fringe on the far left that is, trying to deplatform speakers. You take that and you just kind of casually imply, that's just the entire left. What are you going to do? They're the silly ones, we're the serious ones. And then the implication of the right being populist, as we all know, is just utter bullshit. So most of the left is not authoritarian and elitist. And the right is not actually populist. But he inverts reality, and he does it in a way where it's digestible for people. And I think that's an important point. Because stop and think about it. If he's framing the right as populist, and he is, and he's framing the left as authoritarian and elitist, well, then wouldn't the move to get money out of politics, and wouldn't the move of uncorrupted candidates that take no corporate PAC money, wouldn't that movement be coming from the right, Tucker? But it's not. It's not coming from the right. You have Our Revolution, you have PCCC, you have Justice Democrats. You have this massive populist left revolution where we are demanding our candidates take no corporate PAC money. In fact, we've pushed establishment politicians to stop taking corporate PAC money. So we're the ones who are fighting for that. We're the ones who are fighting for a living wage for workers. We're the ones who are fighting for a union. We're the ones who are fighting for a New Deal. We're the ones who want Medicare for all to give people health care. So the real populist movement is on the left, but he inverts it, and he inverts it in a way where it's almost like you know how when you have to give your dog medicine, you put it in applesauce or something, and then the pill goes down with the applesauce. That's what he's doing with his arguments. It's like he's cloaking it in a grain of truth so that you walk away on, I guess the right is populist and the left is elitist and authoritarian. And ultimately, that's just not true. Okay, and now, finally, this is the biggest deception from Tucker. He doesn't tell the truth about Trump. He doesn't tell the truth about Trump. So he will never tell you the distinction of this is how Trump campaigned, this is how he's governing. And that's the biggest deception and the grossest part of what Tucker Carlson does. Because, yeah, you could say, sure, when Trump ran, he said, I'm not going to cut Social Security, I'm not going to cut Medicare, I'm not going to outsource jobs. I'm going to protect your jobs. You could point to the populist stuff he said on the campaign trail, but in terms of the policies he's pursued since he's been in office, he's the establishment's wet dream. 100%. I mean, his tax bill, 83% of the tax cuts go to the top 1%. It's a giant corporate tax cut. Goldman Sachs is littered throughout his administration, whether it was Steve Mnuchin or Gary Cohn. I mean, he's doing exactly what George W. Bush would have done. That's what this is. That's what he's doing. Look at his foreign policy. He's a warmonger. He's bombing 8 different countries, with the exception of North Korea, which I'll give him credit on. But everywhere else, he's bombing 8 different countries. He's escalating with Iran. And what Tucker never does is he never makes that distinction. Here's how Trump campaigned, somewhat populist. Here's how he's governing, very elitist and pro-establishment. And in fact, he misleads you. He says, he implied like, it's getting better now. Like now people know that somebody's looking out for them in the White House. No, look at the actual data. Wages are stagnant. They've been stagnant since the 1980s. They're not improving now. When you adjust for inflation, wages have actually dropped. That's an important point to make, don't you think? Half of workers in America make $30,000 a year or less. 76% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 93,000 jobs have been outsourced under Trump, which is an increase from Obama. So for him to imply like, it's getting better now because somebody's in the Oval Office looking out for the middle class, that's just not true. That's just not true. So he's better at his propaganda than the other Fox hosts, but ultimately it is propaganda because the core of what he's arguing for is nonsense. If he actually believed in populism, he would support Bernie Sanders. But he doesn't. I don't think he really does. And I'm sure all you guys have noticed there are segments he does on his show. One of his main issues is immigration. And people have accused him of being a closet white nationalist. And is there truth to that claim? Maybe. I mean, the segments I've seen of him on immigration, I've cringed a little bit. What exactly do you want, Tucker? Like, what is your ideal immigration policy? And listen, if he comes out and he gives an answer to that question, and that answer is not effectively white nationalism, like giving policies that would lead to a white ethno-state, well, then I think it's not fair to call him that, and you would have to say, no, he might be right-wing on immigration, but he's not a white nationalist. But he's never made crystal clear what his belief is on immigration. And when you are towing that line and pushing that argument of like, immigrants are the problem, immigrants are the problem, immigrants are the problem, really, whether or not Tucker acknowledges it, he's being a puppet for the rich, because that's the argument the rich want average Americans to believe. The elites and the establishment want middle-class white people to blame poor minorities and people of color for all their problems, so that the middle-class whites don't realize the real problem is the rigged system and the fact that the rich have rigged the system against all working people who are black, white, brown, and everything in between. So he's using the oldest argument, the divide and conquer bullshit strategy that the elites use, as he pretends to be anti-elitist. And I do think he's better at his propaganda than the other Fox hosts. But ultimately, he's selling a message that's very, very similar. And under slight scrutiny, that worldview that he's presenting totally falls apart.